And I think what we may do is, I think we'll go, oh, here we go.
All right,
Awesome.
we are good to go.
Thank you. So good evening. I am officially calling the meeting to order for the Council for Minnesotans of African Heritage. And today is September 14th. And we are recording for those that are joining us as participants. And then we have a couple special guests. So if I can have someone from CMAH do the roll call, and then we'll get into our other business and kind of get moving.
Would you like me to do the roll call?
Will you please? That'd be awesome.
Okay. All right, starting from the top. Chair Hughes.
Present.
Vice Chair Doe.
Present.
Councilmember Crawford.
Present.
Councilmember Nandi.
Present.
Councilmember Adams-Lee.
Present.
Councilmember Mullins.
Present.
Councilmember Winston.
Present.
Senator Fatah.
Present.
Councilmember Dukes.
Present.
Councilmember Daniels.
Here.
All right, that looks to be all the council members.
Awesome, thank you. And if I can have a motion to adopt our meeting agenda. The only correction is Wookie Way is not available, but instead we will have Matt Norris, who is going to speak instead from YouthPrise. So if I can just have a motion to approve and adopt the meeting agenda.
So moved, Crawford.
Is there a second?
I second.
Awesome, all in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Perfect, motion carries. And then our consent agenda item, the only item that we had was our approval of the minutes. So hopefully everybody had a chance to read the minutes, and if there were no corrections or additions, if I can have a motion to approve our consent agenda item.
So moved, Crawford.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second. Winston.
And all in favor?
Aye.
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 Perfect. Thank you so much. So we're going to move into our presentations. And we actually have a couple of guests with us today. So we have former Justice Alan Page. Was he able to join us? Okay, because I know I can only see so many on the screen. And then the other person that we have is Neel Kashkari. And I see that you are with us as well. What they're going to be presenting on is the page amendment. And then after which we will hear from Matt Norris with YouthPrise. So go ahead and do we want to wait? I just saw that it said that he'll be here shortly. So we can either start with Matt, or if you all want to, or Neel, if you want to.
I think if it's okay with you, I'll go ahead and kick off, and Justice Page will join us momentarily. So my name is Neel Kashkari, President of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. Thank you for this opportunity. We really appreciate it. I know Alan was excited about this meeting, as am I, so thank you for this. I've been president of the Minneapolis Fed for 5.5 years. Now, what is the Federal Reserve? The Federal Reserve is our nation's central bank, and it is distributed around the country. So there are 12 regional Federal Reserve banks, and our job is to represent this region in the nation's monetary policy process. And we were created by the United States Congress in 1913. One of the goals that Congress has given us is maximum employment, as many people as possible gainfully employed and contributing to our economy. So when I moved to Minnesota to take this job, I'd done some homework. I knew Minnesota had a diverse economy. I knew Minnesota on average has good schools and a highly educated workforce. So I was shocked when I got here to discover that Minnesota has some of the worst education disparities in the country between white students and children of color and indigenous students, and between middle-class students and low-income students. We have some of the worst in the country. And I asked our researchers, why is that? Why is Minnesota so good in some dimensions, but falling woefully inadequate in these other dimensions? And we looked at the data, and Minnesota has been at this problem for 20 or 30 years. And if we're honest with each other, we have made literally zero progress, literally zero, despite a lot of people trying very hard. And what we looked around the country, that's not true everywhere. There are states that have made real progress in elevating their children of color and elevating their low-income children. So I said, why not Minnesota? And what I realized is that politics seems to be getting in the way. Here comes Alan. We are a politically divided state. Both parties care about education, but they don't agree on the solution. And so what do? They make little minor tweaks around the margins of the system instead of fundamentally updating the system itself. So more than 2 years ago, I reached out to the man who just joined us, Justice Page. I reached out to him because I knew he spent 22 years on Minnesota's Supreme Court. And I knew that he had a lifetime of passion for education and education equity. He and his wife having founded the Page Education Foundation 30 plus years ago. And I asked him, I said, is there a way, Justice Page, I said, I'm not a lawyer, is there a way we could use the law to break through these barriers and literally put children first? So we started looking at it, and we started by looking at the foundation of our state, which is the state constitution. Well, you know, the state constitution actually says something about education. It essentially says children in Minnesota have the right to access an adequate education system. Well, what does that mean? An adequate education system. It is a system that is on average adequate. It is wonderful for some. It is lousy for others. And if your child has access to that system, whether they're at the top of the system or the bottom, it doesn't matter. The state's duty has been fulfilled. Well, as we looked at that, we realized, wow, Minnesota's education system today is performing exactly as the Constitution requires. And oh, by the way, when was that language written? It was written in 1857. I don't need to remind people, but in 1857, slavery was still legal in much of America. And you know, who was that education system intended for? Was it intended for children of color? Was it intended for low-income kids? No. And so as we looked at that, we realized, wow, we know why we are where we are, because that's how the system has been designed from its foundation. And when we looked around the country, some states have updated their constitutions and said, you know what, adequate's not good enough. Our children deserve a quality education. How about that? Who wants an adequate education for their child? Not me, not you. So we've come up with a proposal. I'm going to turn it over here to Alan in a second. We've come up with a proposal to modernize our Constitution, to create a civil right for every child in Minnesota, every child, no matter who their parents are, no matter how wealthy their family is, every child has a civil right to a quality public education. And then so importantly, it makes delivering on this right the state's highest priority, because that's where we think education deserves to be, our number one priority. You know, I meet people and they'll say to me, oh, you've got it all wrong, Kashkari. It's not about education. You got to first solve poverty. Well, you know, that's an excuse to defend the status quo, because by the way, the most powerful tool we have to end poverty is actually education. So when people say you have to first solve poverty, that's an excuse to defend where we are today. So don't believe them when they say that, because it's not right. And other states have poverty too, yet other states are making real progress. So with that brief intro, let me turn it over to Alan to offer his perspective.
Thank you, Neil, and let me apologize for being a little late. I had grandparent duty today. You know, I come to this after 33, 34 years working to change the future for particularly young men and women of color here in Minnesota. But beyond that, with the Page Education Foundation, but beyond that, with 50 plus years of spending time in schools and classrooms talking to young children about the importance and value of education and how they can use it as a tool to achieve whatever their hopes and dreams are. A tool that they can use to reach their fullest potential. When Neel called and asked if I would sit down with him and talk about what we might do to create a catalyst and begin to address these horrific disparities in opportunity and in performance, I thought this was a great opportunity to focus on the foundation of our system, because given the system's systemic and systematic failures and the systemic and systematic leaving children of color behind, and quite frankly, poor white children behind, we can't just tinker around the edges any longer. To create change and a catalyst for change, we have to change the system. And so we sat down and looked at that constitutional language and developed some what we think is language that can be the catalyst. That language provides, creates a civil right for all children to have a quality public education. And I don't know, does somebody have the amendment available so that people can have a chance to see it? And it begins, well, let me just say, the current constitutional language, as Neel pointed out, focuses on the system and the adequacy of that system. It does not say anything about children. And our Supreme Court has held that children have a right to access an adequate system. But again, an adequate system doesn't ensure quality for our children. And so we thought we would amend the language to include children. And so the language begins, all children have a fundamental right to a quality public education that fully prepares them with the skills necessary for participation in the economy, our democracy, and society, as measured against uniform achievement standards set forth by the state. Now that quality public education, you ask us, well, how do we define quality? Well, quality is defined by an education that fully prepares children with the skills necessary for participation in the economy, democracy, and society. As measured against uniform achievement standards. Why as measured against uniform achievement standards set forth by the state? And by the way, that clause, uniform achievement standards set forth by the state, is not intended to constitutionalize or institutionalize the current testing regimen that we use to, and I will put this in quotes, measure system performance. And I put it in quotes because it not only doesn't do a good job of measuring the performance of children, it certainly doesn't measure in any way the performance of the system. But we have to have some accountability, and that's why that language is there. Otherwise, you could have a system that involved, as an example, using graduation rates. We could just lower the bar so that everybody graduated, and we wouldn't have changed anything. People still wouldn't be college ready. They still wouldn't be work ready. They wouldn't be prepared. And so we think it's critically important to have some accountability measure. As Neel pointed out, this next sentence, it is a paramount duty of the state to ensure quality public schools that fulfill this fundamental right. That clause makes education, quality public schools, the highest priority of the state. There is nothing else in the state constitution that makes education a paramount duty. And a paramount duty is the duty of the highest order. And so when you hear people say, well, our language really is a tool for underfunding education, you can't meet a paramount duty underfunding it. And so that's just a false assertion. One of the other assertions we hear is that our proposal is really just a vehicle to move us to privatizing public education. That is the last thing this language does. The language itself belies that. It is a paramount duty to ensure quality public schools. You can't, given that language, you can't fund or move towards privatizing public education at the expense of quality public schools. The language just is clear. You can't do that. The other thing that sentence does is it makes the responsibility of the state. It is the state's responsibility, and the state and all three branches have a role to play: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. Because a right without a remedy isn't much of a right. And this gives children and families a remedy for when their right to a quality public education is being denied. Neel, have I missed anything?
You know, the only thing I would add, and we really look forward to getting your questions and your comments. The only thing I would add is the response since we announced this proposal has really been remarkable. And if it's okay, if we could take the slide down to whoever's controlling the screen, thank you. We have united many Democrats of color with conservative Republicans from Greater Minnesota. We have united Attorney General Ellison, who is a strong supporter of this proposal, with the CEOs of the biggest businesses in Minnesota. These are folks that don't normally see eye to eye, but they're agreeing that enough is enough, that we need to put children first, and we can't keep doing what we've been doing. And by changing the Constitution, just as Alan said, this is a powerful catalyst for change. Who is resisting us? Those for whom the status quo is just fine. You know, I'm new to Minnesota, and I'll just tell you something, my observation in 5.5 years of being here. Minnesota is world class in talking about equity. I've never lived anywhere where they talk such a good game. Where's the reality? The reality is they do little tiny tweaks around the margins. And when somebody comes forward and says, here's the time to fundamentally update the system so it works for everyone. Whoa, whoa, whoa. So that's what this is about. This is our best shot to say, now let's build a new education system that includes all of our children for the future. And the last thing I'll say, nobody has presented us with an alternative. If somebody has a plan, but it can't generate bipartisan support, that's not a plan, that's a soundbite. We've said to our opponents, show us your plan. How would you tweak this language? How would you make it better? We are open-minded to making it better, but we are not on board with defending the status quo. And all we've gotten from our opponents is a bunch of talk that is really just about defending the status quo. And that's frustrating, but it gives us confidence that we're on the right track. So with that, thank you for having us. We'd love to take your questions. I know that you have a full schedule, so we want to be respectful of that.
No, thank you, Neel. Thank you, Justice Page. I'm still calling you Justice Page.
Thank you.
Retired or not, you're still Justice Page. And it looks like Councilmember Dukes has a question. Go ahead, Andre.
Hello, everyone, and I apologize. I'm driving, so I'm in the car. But Mr. Kashkari and Justice Page, I just wanted to say how much I appreciate the work that you are doing. I've been following this issue along with the Northside Achievement Zone, whom I work for. And I do remember that part of the opposition is fear of lawsuits. And I was just wondering if you can speak to a little bit about, where that's coming from and why that is not necessarily an issue here.
Well, I will be honest with you. I don't necessarily understand that fear of lawsuits, at least as articulated. I think back on our history of civil rights. Absent lawsuits, we would not have Brown versus the Board of Education. Let that sink in. Absent lawsuits and the ability to have rights vindicated, we would not be where we are today. And yes, litigation is possible, but the purpose is to ensure that rights get fulfilled. The purpose isn't litigation for the sake of litigation. That doesn't do anybody any good. And when you look around the country at other states that have changed their constitution, there hasn't been any increase in litigation. And litigation goes on today, truth be told. So quite frankly, I don't understand the argument. But then there are a number of arguments that they sound good to the ear when you first hear them. They make you stop and think. But then once you think, you're left with the question, well, what is this all about? Why don't they tell us what they're really concerned about?
And if I could just briefly add, it's very interesting that Attorney General Ellison, whose job it is to defend the state, said his job right now is to defend the indefensible. But that's what the standard is. So he's got to do it. He wants to raise the standard so that, maybe we ought to lose some of these lawsuits because kids are not getting the education they deserve.
So Councilmember Crawford, thank you both for those comments, and thank you, Councilmember Dukes, for that question. Councilmember Crawford typed into the chat, given the current backdrop of the pandemic and the many students we have lost over the past year, the challenges of rural technology, how would this plan work to create a level playing field?
Well, in its simplest form, it creates a level playing field because it requires us to educate individual children. We have to meet the needs of individual children. And whatever it takes to meet those needs, to create the opportunity to both reach their full potential and to be fully prepared, I think that is kind of the best answer I can give you.
And if I could just add, it's intentionally non-prescriptive. Okay. So the kids in greater Minnesota, what they need to reach their full potential is likely going to be different than some kids in the Twin Cities or some kids in the suburbs. The state is now on the hook to help, just as Alan said, each of those children reach their full potential. And if that means they need laptops or broadband internet access to be able to access it, so be it. But it's not one size fits all across the state.
No, thank you for that.
And I would just add the fact that one group of children gets their needs met doesn't reduce the obligation to meet everybody else's needs. And so this isn't kind of a zero-sum game. Just because I win doesn't mean you lose. Indeed, we both win. Everybody wins.
So I see Councilmember Adams Lee, your hand is up. Go ahead with your question, and then after which Councilmember Doe has another question. I am going to pass this over to Councilmember, our Vice Chair Doe, because I actually, so I'm gonna just be in all transparency. Today's my birthday. My kids are taking me out to eat. So we have reservations at 6:45.
Self-care,
Happy
self-care.
But I
Hey.
still gotta do my duty before I do the other stuff.
Happy birthday, Chair.
Thank you, thank you. So I'm gonna pass this over to Vice Chair Doe, but Councilmember Adams, Lee, go ahead with your question, and then Vice Chair Doe, go with your question. Thank you all. I may try and join you from my car.
Happy birthday. Thank you.
Happy
Thank
birthday.
you.
Happy birthday. Justice Page, I will say Justice Page as well. When I came to Minnesota in 1996, my husband and I worked on a project with you as a new person to Minneapolis. So this is a dream come true to be able to actually have a conversation with you personally. And I just needed to get that out of the way. So
Thank you.
So one of the things that is of concern to me as a parent, grandparent, constituent of Native American part of my life on the reservation in Oklahoma, Muskogee, Oklahoma, and the other side of my life in Compton, California, is also as your counterpart named is coming to the state of Minnesota, the liberal state of Minnesota, and noticing that the applicability of getting her done is not occurring. I know I grew up in the South, and one of the things that we were taught, specifically from a grandmother who had a second grade education but was a brilliant mathematician, is that freedom comes in your mind and through education. They can take other things, but they cannot take what you've gotten in your mind. And so one of the many things that I'm concerned about around education, is teaching to the behavior around special education and children who have difficulty in getting the services that they need face-to-face prior to COVID, so pre-COVID, and then in the midst of COVID and now post-COVID, and looking at the Civil Rights Act that most people don't know, special education for children of color and what that means. And so it seems to me that, and I'm asking, not telling, sirs, how do we reset to where what you're offering also speaks to teaching academics to the child and not teaching to behavior, because behavior is not what special education was the original plan of special education. And it seems that we've lost our way there. And being a person who works in the schools with children of color, I feel hopeless. And I'm wondering, how does your initiative encompass and empower parents, grandparents, and children that are brilliant in their own right, but are taught to their academic brilliance, not to their symptomatic behaviors?
Well, I think it goes to what I suggested before, what I said before. We have to educate individual children. And meeting the needs of individual children academically. As you point out, we aren't doing that today. And I don't know how we could make that point stronger than constitutionalizing the fact that we have to educate the children that are in front of us, the children that are in the classroom, not some other child. This isn't about remaking children. It's about preparing the ones that we have in the way that they learn.
And if I might just add very briefly, we looked at other state constitutions when coming up with this language. So as an example, Washington State also says all children. And the courts in Washington said in a case, they said all children means all children, not most children, not many children, all children. And so this is designed intentionally to encompass children with special needs, children who excel in some dimensions, children who need other help in other dimensions. Give each child what he or she needs to reach their full potential, whatever that potential is.
And I respectfully understand and appreciate what you're saying. However, how do we integrate this proposal, this initiative, this constitutional right within a system that is broken? And so this sounds wonderful, and I respectfully support it. However, reality is where I live, and the application of that is that folks don't want to educate the child. They don't feel that that child deserves to have an education. And so in the gray areas, we're still losing, which is where the children are at, right? And that's my concern, my continual concern.
This proposed language does not seek to fix the system. It requires that the system change, that we do things differently. This is our opportunity to design and create a system of education that meets the needs of every child. And, that won't come easy, but this language over time will get us there. And I can guarantee the language we have today isn't going to get us there.
And the only thing I would add, you're asking a great question, so thank you for pushing us on it. So first of all, how do we amend the Constitution? It's been introduced in the House and Senate. We need it to pass in the House and Senate. Then it'll go to the voters in the next general election, and we believe it'll overwhelmingly pass by the voters of Minnesota. So then the language is changed, but then what? It's just words on a page. Well, that is the opportunity at that time for the legislature and the governor and the parents and the teachers to come together and say, let's now design the system of the future. So some legislators have said to us, we're afraid the courts are going to get involved. And we say, fine, if you do your job, the courts won't have any reason to get involved. If you refuse to do your job, then you're right. We want the courts to get involved at that point. And so, one of the things that Alan and I have told a lot of people is once this passes, that's when the real hard work begins in designing that new system that achieves exactly what you're talking about.
And the only thing I would add is in the ideal world, we would be beginning the work of designing that system today. But unfortunately, we don't live in the ideal world.
Nothing easy, nothing worth having, it comes easy. So thank you both.
Well, let me just step in quickly. I want to ask a question. I think Judge Page kind of just alluded to exactly what I was about to ask. But I just want to thank both of you for being here. I do see there's another hand, Council Member Winston and Nutty. We have you ask your questions. Is that quick? Let's just keep timing focus because we have a full agenda to go through today. Okay, Council Member Winston, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll keep it real quick. You know, I believe I understand the concept of getting this amendment in the Constitution. I think my issue, I guess my concern, and maybe some of the people who were concerned about lawsuits were kind of looking forward. And that's not to say you guys haven't kind of gamed this out, but you say you change it, it gets an amendment, they sit down and they change, they try to design this new system. Part of my issue is that, and I think Neel, you pointed this out earlier, it's in some people's interest for this not to change whatsoever. And I'm not talking about the system itself, I'm talking about the status of where people of color children, specifically Black children, are versus other children. So even if you put an amendment in place and you change the systems, I have this sneaking suspicion that a lot of the teachers, the educators, the administrators, senators, everyone who has an issue with this is going to go throw up so many roadblocks and legalese and language that the amendment is going to mean whatever they want it to mean by the end of the day, and it's not going to mean much. That's not to say that I don't think the approach should happen, but that's my biggest fear in terms of my understanding of racism, my understanding of laws that were put on the books for affirmative action and many other things. At the end of the day, it's great, but then the powers that, not the powers that be, but some of the powers that be kind of say, we'll take care of it to their people, and the whole thing just slows down, right? And so I guess part of my concern, and this isn't necessarily part of this conversation, is within those communities, what can those communities do to build out their own infrastructure to help their children? Because I have no faith whatsoever in the current system taking care of my children. And even if you put an amendment in place, everything will be done in power to slow it down. And at the end of the day, it will be made to mean very little, even if lawsuits occur. I think there will be ways to fight that. And I guess that's my comment. Not as much a question, but I think that's my comment, and that's my biggest concern with that approach. It's just kind of repeating some of history when we see that.
Can I just respond briefly?
Yes.
You know, Brown versus the Board of Education, it was revolutionary. And along the way, the concerns that you just raised happened. They happened because we let it happen. We have to be ever vigilant and hold everyone's feet to the fire. We can't let what happened to Brown happen here. But that's something we have control over.
And if I could just add something real briefly, I mean, I see parallels to this, and I know we're compressed for time, to voting rights. You know, when men of color got the right to vote and then women got the right to vote, it didn't solve everything. And you know the history probably better than I do of everything that was done to stop people from exercising their right to vote. I mean, the Ku Klux Klan was literally formed as a terrorist organization to terrorize people who had just achieved the right to vote, to scare them so they didn't vote. But if you didn't have that right to vote, nothing was possible. So I think Alan and I have talked about it. We don't think that this will magically solve everything, but it is a necessary step to give children this right. And then we have a lot of hard work to do to follow up to fulfill its promise. But if we don't do this, we're going to be having the same conversation for the next 30 years.
So Vice Chair, though, I'll keep it very brief. I know you requested that. Justice Page, thank you, Neel, for showing. Thank you, Neel, for being here. I will say this. I agree that it won't be a quick fix. We have to be vigilant. I think part of my issue, even when we look at voting rights, right, is you look at that turnout from the African American community, you look at turnout from certain communities, and unless it's a Stacey Abrams or somebody doing something, there's very little to mobilize people to take advantage of what the law on the books is, right? So if you pass the law in those specific communities that you passed the law for are not mobilized, you're going to have it on the books and not a whole lot is going to change. And I think that's my biggest concern, is that those communities have to be so involved, which is a different process than getting the amendment through, but they're going to have to be so involved and vigilant, because it can't just be a small cadre of people like us. It has to be those communities very much understanding the amendment. And I haven't seen that with some of the sea change legislation, including Brown versus Board of Education. I haven't necessarily seen that aspect. And I think for this to have a different outcome, not that I have the solution, it's easy to point out the problem, right? But I think if that aspect is there, then yes, you have something in writing, and yes, you have people that are constantly pointing at it and mobilized to change it. So I guess that would be my comment.
I think you just articulated the challenge in front of us, that we or people like us have to be the ones mobilizing and catalyzing our communities to vote, to educate. I mean, it's up to us.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Nandi, do you want to add anything else?
Yes, thank you. This is Jude Nadi. I appreciate you coming today with your time to talk with us about this important initiative. So I'm going to support it with everything I have. I have 2 teenagers, and as if they don't give me enough trouble, the third one is warming up to be 1 teenager again. So, but my take, I know we don't have enough space to discuss something beyond this topic today, but I would appreciate if Neel, if you will come back, or if we have another forum to discuss about economic recovery after COVID, especially the impact it has in our community. Small businesses, micro businesses, our community is crushed by COVID. And the little economic power we have, we've lost it. And it's so devastating. You know, some of us have given up everything we're doing, trying to help out in the community because we see the impact. And we need a bigger force. We need a collaboration. We need alignment in the fight for economic recovery after COVID. So I'm not saying we should discuss anything, but I'm just asking for more opportunity to talk about that some other times. I appreciate your time and coming to discuss with us today. Thank you.
Yes, I would be very pleased to do that. We'll follow up and be very happy to have that conversation. And, you know, I know we're out of time and you've got a full agenda. Just to say, we need your help. The only way this gets passed is if leaders like all of us unite and demand change. And so I don't know if you all take an official position as a council, if you vote on things, but we need your help. You know, Alan and I went and presented to the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council, and they unanimously endorsed this because Native kids need help too, and which was great. And so whatever you can do to get in the game, get in the fight to support this, we would appreciate it.
Great. Thank you so much, Neel and Josh Page. I think it's a broad acceptance in terms of the proposal, so to speak, and we will support that. And as you mentioned, and a council member just said that, you know, what can we do as a council to support this? So we will have that discussion, and if it means writing a letter of support or whatever, we have that discussion around that and see how much we can support the effort as well. So thank you so much, Josh Page and Neel, for coming in. Hopefully, again, as that council member Nandi mentioned, we probably get back to you to get more part of your wisdom in helping our community.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
All right. Okay, we will move on with our agenda. Next is, of course, we're going to have, let's see, where's that? Just make sure here. Matt, right? Matt Norris from YouthPrise.
Yes, thank you.
All right, you're up.
All right, excited to be with you all this evening. Thanks for the opportunity. That's a tough act to follow, but I'll do my best, and I'll also do my best to kind of keep it short since I know you've got a busy agenda today. I'm going to briefly share my screen here. Give me just a second to pull up the right one. There we go. Wanted to talk to you today about our policy work at YouthPrise. So I'm imagining that many of you may not be familiar with YouthPrise. So I'll start by just briefly introducing the organization. YouthPrise is an organization that was spun off by the McKnight Foundation back in 2011. So we're celebrating our 10th anniversary this year. And our mission is to increase equity with and for Minnesota's Indigenous, low-income, and racially diverse youth. And we do that in a number of different ways. One is by mobilizing and investing resources. We grant out about $4 to $6 million a year to youth-serving organizations around the state. The second way we do that is by advancing knowledge. We serve as kind of a think tank around youth issues in the state of Minnesota. And then the third is by advocating for change, and that's where our policy work fits in. And specifically, last year, we rolled out a new multi-year policy agenda that we're calling a new generation of equity. And we felt that it was important to do so at that time, both because there was a need and also an opportunity in the policy space to go bigger and bolder with our policy ambitions. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of how this agenda was developed, what's in it, and some of the successes we've already had with the work that we're doing. So our process when developing this agenda was to really center youth voice in the process. That's something that's key to our work at YouthPrise. Something that a lot of people don't know is our board is actually 50% young people. It's one-to-one youth and adults. And so when it comes to developing a policy agenda, we really felt it was important to incorporate youth voice front and center as well. And so we did that in a couple of different ways. We first reached out to allied organizations around the state to kind of get a sense of, what were the policy priorities they were focused on, where were maybe there's some gaps that YouthPrise could come in and take the lead on to address critical advocacy issues. And then we went to the young people and we engaged young people from across Minnesota in a number of different focus groups to kind of draw out what are the most important issues to them in the policy arena. But we didn't just stop there. We wanted to also engage young people in the solutions building process, not just stop with, tell us what your concerns are, but what are some of the innovative ways that young people have to solve some of those critical issues. And so our Youth Participatory Action research team led a couple of youth ideation sessions where we worked with young people to identify proposed solutions to core policy issues. So what were some of the key themes that emerged from those sessions and that are reflected in our policy agenda? The number one issue we heard time and again, every single session from young people was mental health. And so that was something that we realized wasn't as much on our radar screen prior to this, especially in the policy arena, but we needed to really take a much closer look at what are some of the things we can do to address mental health for young people. Other things that came up were making sure that we've got more youth at decision-making tables, challenges around lack of financial resources for young people and their families, the difficulty of navigating the various support systems that exist, the critical issue of having stable and affordable housing. We heard a lot about culturally relevant education and quality education, piggybacking on what we just heard about, and then alternative learning opportunities as well. So then what we try to do is distill all of that down to some key issues that we were going to lead on and then others that we would support within our three key impact areas at YouthPrise. And those impact areas are learning and leadership, economic opportunity, and health and safety. So I'll walk you briefly through what became part of the agenda. So in the learning and leadership category, one of the two items that we're leading on is trying to modernize the K-12 education tax credit. This is a really powerful tool that's been around since 1997. It can help low-income families in Minnesota get up to 75% off educational and arts-based out-of-school time programs, driver's ed, educational computer hardware, school supplies, but only about 34% of eligible families each year are using it. And only about 4% of the total potential funding is being used. And so there's a number of things that we think can be done to improve the access to this tool. One is simply updating the income limit. The income limit of $33,500, regardless of household size, to qualify for this tax credit hasn't changed since it was enacted in 1997. So we've been pushing hard to try to update that and ideally benchmark it to free and reduced price lunch eligibility. We also think there's a lot that can be done in terms of streamlining and claiming the process for this tax credit. We tallied it up. It's about 26 steps for a family to fully utilize this tax credit. That's simply way too many steps. And so we're working hard with the Department of Revenue and with the legislature to try to at least cut that in half. And then there's some issues with the definition of qualified instructor. It's overly reliant on kind of traditional definitions and credentials and isn't based in what we know to be true about what makes for high quality out of school time programming. The other issue we're leading on, and that harkens back to one of those themes I mentioned previously, is making sure that youth voice is involved in the governance process. And so we're trying to make sure that there are at least 2 youth members on every governing board throughout the state, whether that's a school board, a public board, a council, a commission. We've started this work at the local level. We've had great success in Northfield. In fact, the first former youth board member in Northfield is now, just this past year, was elected to the Northfield City Council. So that's a great demonstration of how this can really propel people to be leaders in our state. We're working in St. Paul, in the Brooklands. We're going to start working with our executive branch agencies at the state. And this is something that we heard time and again from young people was really critical. And then we actually have 8 items in our support category for learning and leadership. I won't go through all of them for the sake of time, but you can see them here. And it's really about making sure that there's equitable access to learning opportunities, making sure that we're providing support to equitable access to out of school time opportunities as well, and then making sure that there's access to the data that we need to evaluate, are we equitably providing those opportunities and seeing equitable outcomes for all of our young people throughout Minnesota. In our economic opportunity impact area, we also identified 2 issues that we're leading on. One of the biggest, and this has been something we've been focused on now for the past year, has been making secondary school students eligible for unemployment insurance. There was this law from 1939 on the books here in Minnesota that said that high school students were not eligible for unemployment insurance. And so as a lot of young people were getting laid off from their jobs at the start of the pandemic, we started to hear from young people who couldn't claim unemployment insurance benefits, even though they were working to support themselves and their family. So we actually teamed up with a group of young people. They actually kind of started organizing first, and then YouthPrise, along with a number of other organizations, came alongside them in kind of true youth-adult partnership to fight to try to overturn that law. It started last summer, summer of 2020, with trying to seek a temporary solution at the legislature in those endless special sessions we were having. And we were unfortunately unable to get something through then. So we pivoted and actually went to the courts and sued the state of Minnesota, seeking access to the temporary federal pandemic unemployment assistance benefits that were available from the federal government at the time. And we won that lawsuit. And as a result, over $30 million worth of unemployment insurance benefits have been paid out to Minnesota youth because of that court decision. But we still had that underlying 1939 law on the books, and that court ruling only helped as long as the federal pandemic unemployment assistance stayed around, which actually just expired about a week ago. So we worked with young people again this past legislative session to focus on repealing that 1939 law. And I'm proud to report that we were successful. That we got a bipartisan group of legislators to come together and get that passed. It'll take effect next July. So starting in July 2022, there will be no more age-based discrimination on unemployment insurance benefits in Minnesota, which is a huge victory and an example of what can happen when we empower young people to really fight for their rights. The other issue that we lead on in this economic opportunity area is these East African workforce development grants that we have. Those are grants that go out to 17 different organizations around the state to support workforce development work with East African youth. I'm proud to report that we were able to secure a 40% increase in funding for those grants this past legislative session. Some other items that we support in the economic opportunity area, boosting funding for the Youth at Work grants, which fund important internship opportunities and workforce development programs across the state. Again, making sure that we're disaggregating workforce data to identify and pinpoint any inequities in our systems. A critical one is ensuring competitive pay for internships and career exploration. Too often, those opportunities are foreclosed to especially Black and brown young people because they don't have the economic resources to work for, really low cost, or oftentimes, especially in the public sector, those internships, they're not paid at all. And so that really limits those career path opportunities and the chance to get your foot in the door and start working your way through that particular career path. Creating equitable asset building opportunities for families, and then also making sure that all young people have those vital documents and the prerequisites to driving, since we know that unlocks a lot of economic opportunity for young people as well. And then finally, our third impact area at YouthPrise is health and safety. And so within this realm, one of the issues we're leading on is YouthPrise has a nutrition program that helps local rec centers, libraries, houses of worship, YMCAs serve nutritious meals and snacks during their summer and after school programs. But there's a little known tax provision in Minnesota that requires us to actually pay, and nonprofits like us, to pay sales tax on those meals. Even though the cost of the meal gets reimbursed by the federal government, we have to go out and separately raise money to pay the state sales tax on that. So we're focused on trying to secure a narrow sales tax exemption for nonprofit sponsors of the federal meals program, like our organization. We're also really focused on ending youth homelessness in Minnesota. This is something that, it can be solved. We're on our way to doing it for veterans. If we really dedicate ourselves to it, we can do it for young people in Minnesota as well. And the focus there is on providing permanent, stable housing, supportive housing. There's also a great program, Youth Build, that actually employs young people to build affordable housing. And so we want to see increases in the funding for that. But there's absolutely no excuse with the land of abundance that we live in for any young person to be homeless in this state. And then the other items we're supporting, the mental health piece, which I said was absolutely, the number one thing we heard time and again from young people. We're also focused on supporting the Minnesota Coalition for Youth Justice's policy agenda. They had some big wins this past legislative session. And then again, continuing to expand access to healthy and nutritious meals, both through summer electronic benefits transfer or summer EBT, and then trying to achieve universal school meals in our schools. So that's a quick summary of the policy work that we're doing at YouthPrise. Like I said, it's something that we're really proud of. These agenda, or these policy priorities that we've identified in the agenda. It's something where young people and adults are working together in true youth-adult partnership. I think there's a lot of alignment between these agenda items and some of the things you're working on with the council. And we'd love to, if there's any of these in particular where you think there's some alignment, we'd love to partner more closely in trying to accomplish some of these key policy objectives on behalf of young people throughout the state of Minnesota. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Matt. You're doing a lot of work here. I'm sure we can find something definitely that is aligned to what we do. What questions do you have, council members? Any questions for Matt? Okay. So Matt, just basically, when you look at all of the policy pieces that you have as a council, where do you think we fit in, just generally?
Mhm.
You know, yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the areas where I think your help in particular could be useful as a statewide council and kind of part of the state structure is some of the work that we're trying to do with executive branch agencies around both making sure that young people's voice is incorporated into our governing process, and also making sure that we've got the data that we need to identify inequities in our system. So I think both of those are areas where we could really, team up to identify where there are opportunities to get young people involved in the decision-making process, and then where are there, data sets that we need to put some pressure on our executive branch agencies to make sure they're disaggregating it so we can identify those potential inequities and then solve for any of those that do exist.
Okay, and just a quick follow-up. How is YouthPrise, your presence in the communities, the various communities where you identify youth to get involved in the program? How does that work in terms of how your presence within the different communities?
Yeah. So YouthPrise is an intermediary organization. So we don't do a lot of direct programming ourselves. We engage with youth in a couple of different ways. One is where we support and work hand in hand with a lot of youth serving organizations as a funder, through technical assistance and things like that. We also have young people on our board. We contract with young people. We have our Youth Participatory Action Research Team, where we hire young people to go about identifying critical issues in their community, researching those issues in their community, and then proposing and implementing solutions for them. We also have a youth bank program, which is a really cool one where youth get to engage in philanthropy themselves, where they're given a pot of money and they put out, an RFP process, and they actually get to decide how that money gets dispersed in their particular community. So, we're not kind of your typical nonprofit where we're, every day working hand in hand directly on the ground with young people, but we're engaging them in kind of that intermediary level to help solve some of these issues that we're wrestling with as a state.
Great. I see you have your hand up. You have a question.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you, Matt, for the presentation and for the work of YouthPrise. Just a quick question. I would like for you, if you can, say a little bit more about the East African Youth Development Grants Program that through DEED, and your work in that area, that policy, and then also more generally, I mean, that's just a really important area of work for, and concern for our community. And I mean, really, it's important for the state, that matter of youth development, BIPOC youth development, and very much specifically, Black youth development or African heritage youth communities. And so, I mean, if you can say a little bit more about that space of work or that domain, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk more about that program. So that's a program that's been around now for about 5 years, and it's money that comes from the state through DEED that then YouthPrise administers. And we work with this last round, like I said, 17 different organizations around the state. We're required by law that at least 50% of those organizations be in greater Minnesota. So that's one thing I really like about these grants is we're not just focused on the metro area, but making sure that we're serving East African youth all throughout the state, up in the Moorhead area, out in Wilmer, down in Northfield and Faribault. And so what we do then is we provide the funding to those organizations, and they provide a whole suite of services, everything from career exploration and planning to mentorship, to skill development, to entrepreneurial skill building. And then the other critical role that we play is kind of providing technical assistance to those organizations. Many of these are smaller organizations, they're newer, they may not even be 501c3s for that matter. And so it would be difficult if they were simply going out on their own and trying to get state grant money to handle kind of the administrative burden of that. And so one of the things we really focus on is supporting those local homegrown organizations to be able to use those state dollars and comply with the sometimes complex maze of regulations and requirements that come with state dollars.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I wonder, I mean, if you just your own perspective on how those types of investments, because there's certainly a greater need for that type of work. I mean, it's East African youth, whether there's opportunity there to broaden that out, to have programs targeted and really benefiting other youth from other communities as well.
There certainly is. In that, these particular grants come from a broader pool of what are called quote unquote equity dollars in the jobs bill at the state legislature. And so while we've kind of been the designated organization for the grants for supporting East African youth, there are also other organizations receiving funding from that same pot of money that serve, other Black young people, serve Asian young people. And so there certainly is a much broader need than beyond just East African youth. And so luckily there are other organizations receiving money from that same pot to serve those populations.
Thank you. Councilmember Crawford, you're going to close us out on the questioning here, okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Norris, what did your students talk about when it came to public safety? Did they have any concerns about how to be involved or engaged in creating a safe community for our youth with interactions with police?
Yeah, it's a great question. And one we actually talked a fair amount about as staff, because when we reflected back on the structure we created for those focus groups was fairly broad and open-ended. And as we reflected back on it, we were surprised that public safety was not one that came up as frequently as we expected. And certainly wasn't as common as some of the things like mental health and education. Now, that's certainly not to say that it's not an important issue. And I think it certainly is one that's on the minds of a lot of young people. But for one reason or another, and we've talked about, was it maybe something in kind of the process that, the questions we were asking, we didn't see it come up a whole lot, but we certainly identified it personally as staff also as a critical issue. And so that's why we decided to really lean in and support a lot of the work that the Minnesota Coalition for Youth Justice is doing. And from our philosophy at YouthPrise, it's really about what can we do to make sure that we are preventing young people from ever even encountering the justice system. And so that's what we spend a lot of our time with the Minnesota Coalition for Youth Justice focused on, is not even getting young people where they're in a situation where they're interacting with that system, because we know that as soon as they do, there's a whole host of negative outcomes that can result from that.
Excellent. Thank you, sir.
Okay, with that, thank you so much, Matt, for your presentation. I'm sure we'll do some follow-up work with you going forward to be able to work together on this project. All right.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Appreciate the opportunity, everyone.
All right. Take care. Okay. Okay, we move on with our agenda. We go down to our financial report. And I believe Shakira is gonna do. Oh, not Shakira. Sorry, I thought she left the chat room. Alfreda, right?
Yes.
Financial report.
No, I'll be giving it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, okay, great. Great.
Thank you.
All right.
Just 1 second while I get my computer up and running here.
And while you're getting that ready, we don't have any public comments, right? Linda?
No, no public comments. Okay.
Okay, okay, great. That's it, that's it.
Okay, so this will be the last month that we'll have documents from fiscal year 21. So as you look at last fiscal year's ending numbers, we ended up returning to the state about $4,660 and $47,667 was returned to the state. So out of our appropriation from last year, which was 5,000, let me scroll down here. 5,806, $145.55. We ended up spending down a lot of the funds that were appropriated from last year. We also had a lot of funds that rolled over from the previous fiscal year, so fiscal year 20 as well. 54,000 rolled over, which is why it's so much. If you look at our appropriation for this fiscal year, so for fiscal year 22, that'll give you a better number of where we are at. Give me 1 second here, just to scroll through. Apologize. Computer is running very slow this evening. Okay, so our appropriation from this year was substantially less than last year, and that was because of the rollover. So if you look at our appropriation for this year, we're looking at 544,000, which is an increase of about 12,000 from the previous year of our appropriation. We're starting with no rollover funds for this fiscal year as well. If you look over to our expended as well as our encumbered sections, we don't have any negatives. We haven't really expended very much, only 43,000, and the majority of that is just from staff salary. We haven't done any major contracts this year. We also haven't had any major expenditures. That is to be expected because we are only 2 months into this fiscal year. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you, Shakira. Any questions? Okay, it doesn't sound like we have any. I'm sure all of you had the opportunity to review that. So we will continue with our agenda and look at unfinished business. And we had a discussion in our last meeting, definitely about community presentation, community voice during our meetings. That's aligned with folks that we're inviting to come and do presentations. So, and it's up to us, you know, if there are the community organizations that we can identify that can come to do presentation at the same time, definitely we want to encourage that. And that's very important so that we can have a voice from the community. This wouldn't be the usual public comments, but giving, you know, appropriate times for community organizations to at least do some presentation, particularly if it's aligned, not only that it should be aligned with the presentation for that month, but certainly if there are, you know, presentation, for instance, from Department of Human Services, and we have communities, community organizations that have issues or have some questions or something that they can come and do some presentation to. Want to encourage that. So council members, I think we just want to reiterate that if you're looking at having a community, there are organizations that you can put us in contact with to do that, or who are interested. Please, let's encourage that to happen. Okay. Is there any questions around that? Or what questions do you have? Let me put it that way. And that just roll out into our next item here, where we're talking about updates on events for 2022. Now we have some events coming up pretty soon. As you all know, of course, there's been some changes. People are getting back to the buildings to do work, but everything is not the same, of course. We don't know where we're going to be at in terms of what kind of events we're going to have. So I will actually want this part to defer to our executive director, because there are some planning on the way. For instance, our coming up with the Day on the Hill that we have coming up pretty soon. How that's going to look like, that's something up for discussion, definitely. Whether it's going to be in person or we're going to do another version of online, just because we don't have the opportunity to meet as we usually meet during the year. So is there anything you want to add there, Linda, as far as the events for coming up for next year?
Sure. Theo will probably touch on a couple of legislative related events that are coming up for this year, but everything that we are doing for the rest of the year is definitely going to be virtual. We have been told that our office building won't be open until January. And then I believe in January, they will reevaluate the COVID situation and then make a further determination whether or not we can go in. And so at that time, we'll assess whether or not Day on the Hill can be in person or not, or whether or not it has to continue to be virtual. So that's pretty much where we stand with our events.
Right. Any questions on that? Hearing none, that's just a good segue into new business that talks about our meeting structure planning for 2022, the same thing. So we have a proposal in terms of how we meet, whether we want to continue to meet online or have a hybrid meeting. Definitely that would depend on the opportunity to have some people coming to the office for a meeting at a certain time or so. But we just want to put it out there for you and hear your thoughts on that. What do you think? Because it definitely will be a challenge in terms of the situation that we see today, to even go back to meeting in person. I think we have to be very creative in how we meet going forward. And that's why this proposal is on there, that we have hybrid meetings to have, those who probably, and it will depend also how the office is open, what time do we have to do that. All of that will come into play. So what are your thoughts? Any thoughts on that?
Vice Chair Doe, can I also speak to that? I see that.
Yes.
Councilmember Crawford. So for this year, as I mentioned, the office is closed, and anybody who's in the office longer than 10 minutes has to fill out an attestation form. They have to attest to the fact that either they have gotten the vaccine, or they have to demonstrate that they have received a test that says, a COVID test that says that they don't have COVID. And so we currently only have one person who has been cleared to be in the office for longer than 10 minutes, and that individual has gone through that process. Those documents have to be filed with HR. So I would say that for the rest of this year, probably meeting in person, at least at the council offices, is not a viable option.
Right.
So that's something that just came up recently.
Right, definitely. The rest of this year, that's an option. However, going to next year, let me hear your thoughts, because I think it's important to decide what we envision looking at meetings going into 2022, beginning January to December. So we're going to do online, virtual meetings, straight through, or the hybrid proposal. Any thoughts on that? Councilmember Crawford, did you have your hand up?
Yes, Chair. I think it's important that as a commission or council, we model the way of safe meetings, of safe opportunities for us to gather and still get the work done while being safe for our community, safe for our families, and just modeling the way. It's my hope that we can continue to meet this way. I don't know if City Hall is going to continue where I am to be open as we get closer through the fall. This Delta virus, and for many of those who have either lost loved ones or had complications, this is something that I think we really have to take serious and model the way, especially in our Black community. And I'll pause there.
Right. Great. Any other thoughts?
Councilmember Daniels?
Yes.
Hi. I just wanted to echo what Councilmember Crawford said. I think it is very important for us to take this seriously. And I would also suggest that we leave this online option open. And if there are other people who are comfortable and prefer meeting in person, they can. But I think this option should be available for those who don't feel comfortable, and especially our community members as well, to be able to participate this way.
Right. Thank you so much for alluding to that. Definitely the community members, just being able to participate is one of the things that we want to make sure they're able to do, whether it's virtual as always, or have some in-person meetings. Any other thoughts?
I concur. This is Councilmember Dukes. I concur with the hybrid option, but it's really dependent upon what the CDC recommendations are, what the state recommends, and I think that we're going to have to follow those recommendations anyway. So I propose that we table a determination until we get more information later on in this year. My personal preference is always to meet in person. So I would just like to put that on the record, but I understand that that's not possible at this time.
Right. Yeah, great. Yeah, we're not making any decisions here tonight, but just basically get some thoughts around what we're seeing for the rest of the year. Yeah, it's not going to happen, definitely. But I think we should revisit this and look at next year, what will be before us, to look at our meetings. How does that sound? Sounds good? All right, great.
Thank you.
All right. So now we'll just go to our staff report, Executive Director, and we'll just go through that and start with Linda.
Thank you. Okay, I will go through this quickly. As I mentioned, the staff will be working remotely until at least January. Fortunately, there was an exemption that was written into the statute that says that if there is some type of health pandemic, we do not have to have one person in the office. I was a little concerned about that at first, that at least somebody would have to be in the office for all of our meetings, but there was an exemption in the statute. Just from an HR perspective, Senator Fate has been appointed to the council by Senator Kent, our minority leader of the Senate, and I believe that he might still be on the call. I know he was earlier today, so would just like to welcome him to the council board. Femi, our student intern, will remain with us throughout the year based on his class schedule. And then I wanted to let you know that Amber's position had been posted briefly for about a week, but then the HR system was being revamped, so they had to take down all of the positions that were posted. But thankfully, it's up now again. We will get that position sent to you so that you can forward it to your colleagues and to people who you think might be a great fit. It will be up for 21 days, and after which we will be interviewing candidates. And I am also seeking individuals who might want to be a part of that interview team. So if HR and recruitment is a burning desire of yours, please reach out to me. The staff has been pretty busy with a lot of more of the administration related work. As you heard, we did a lot of budget work and things like that. And now we're into our strategic planning phase. So what are we going to be doing coming up for the session? So we've had 2 strategic planning sessions where we've done a SWOT analysis. We've started working on our legislative agenda and priorities, and then our legislative process. What does it look like when people come to us with an issue or someone comes to us with a bill that they want us to support? What are the steps that we should be following? So we're just trying to streamline our work to make it more efficient and to make it more equitable. And we're also working on our goals. From a marketing perspective, for some reason, everybody wants to partner with us to do some marketing. So we will be hosting at some point in October a panel with the Afro-Latino community, and that will be hosted by Al McFarland from Insight News as part of his Conversations with Al group. He has asked me if I would write a column in Insight News, so it would be for the council. I wouldn't have to write the column all the time. It would be written by us. So there might be issues. So for example, I know Councilmember Nandi is heavy into economic development. So there might be an opportunity for him to write an editorial or what have you, a column, and then we would put that in the Insight News. We are still planning to have a regular segment on the Conversations with Al McFarland Insight News YouTube channel. It will be legislative focused, and it will be about discussing the various issues. And we will be, but with this one, we'll be bringing on legislators to have the discussions about more so the policy and what needs to be done. So we're trying to, educate our constituents and get them engaged in the legislative process. And then lastly, related to marketing, we'll be doing some Facebook Live panels with Attorney General Keith Ellison. So I would love to get some feedback from you guys on like what topics you'd love to hear about. Excuse me. The last thing that I've been working on is that we're just coming out of the special session, and we've been asked and charged with actually being participants on various work groups. So you'll get information and emails about joining various groups probably from Shakira. So please take a look and see if it's of your interest. We'd love to have you. Right now, I'm working on an African American Missing and Murdered Task Force group, and then a predatory sex offender work group. And those are groups by statute. It's been determined that they want to make sure that there is an African heritage presence. So that's about it for me in terms of my work and outreach. Thank you.
Any questions? What questions do you have for Linda? Linda, I don't know whether someone else will cover this, but I know we talked about the fair. That's as far as the partnership with the AG office. Are you
yes, I don't know if Femi is still online.
Okay.
I am.
If our intern is online, I'll let him speak to that. Femi, can you speak to the expungement fair?
Of course. So the expungement fair is currently on hiatus with the current COVID variant. We had to postpone it to October. In the meantime, we're working on making sure that we have enough translators to serve our diverse population, and we're still trying to have a firm date as things are still fluid with the current situation with the coronavirus.
Thank you. And then one other last point. The AG also asked us about doing a vaccination clinic, and I am happy to report that we were able to do that in partnership with the 21 Days of Peace, which I'm working on. So we brought a big bus really, to 36 and Lindale in Minneapolis, and we're successful at getting a number of people vaccinated. So we were able to have our council table out there with literature and all kinds of stuff. So we're excited to help the state in moving forward with what's going on with this pandemic.
Yeah, that's nice. That was good, really good. You know, the state is pushing to get people vaccinated, you know, offering some incentives as well. So let's just keep getting people out there or letting them know. Councilmember Crawford?
Yes, Chair Doe and Ms. Sloan, question about the moratorium. Have you been getting any comments about the housing moratorium that's been lifted, as well as the unemployment funds that will not be coming to our community anymore? And if so, what work or help could we do to help lift up that conversation?
Yeah, I have not, and I don't believe Shakira, anything has come through our email box. Theo, have you heard anything about it? Has anybody mentioned anything to you?
In terms of, is the question with regards to community members making calls to us about it, or just information about our rental assistance and what comes after the end of the
Yes,
moratorium?
a little of both. Is community coming to the council seeking help? And if so, what help is there, and how can we lift up help that's there for our community?
I think the main thing that we've been doing is providing information about the cliff. That is a phrase that they use, but the rental assistance program of the state. And we've been having that information in our bulletin and trying to share that on social media. Very important indeed. There is rental assistance available if you are impacted by COVID and you're unable to make payments, rental payments. There's certainly some relief up to I think next June. But it's actually just having information about that program and actually applying. The work we've been doing is to just get the word out about that. But we've not. I'm not familiar with any calls that have been made.
We can put together maybe a document about some of those grants and some of the opportunities for our people to get assistance. We could probably pull some of that together. Granted, we put that information in our bulletin that comes out every Friday, but because we put it in there when we get it, it might not be comprehensive. So we could start pulling that data together and then maybe just pulling together a one sheet and distributing that to you guys so that if you do get some questions, you'll have that information. And some of it I know for sure, I believe, is on our website. And if it's not, it will be. But I'm pretty sure that most of those things are on our website.
Excellent. Thank you, Executive, because I know in my community right now, people are suffering in silence and they're either too proudful or don't really know where to go to get help.
Right.
And there's help out there. And the last thing we want to do is have our state return dollars that could have been there to help people. Thank you.
And Linda, I love that idea. You know, I know it's out there, but you know, if you definitely put something on a one pager, that will help also kind of consolidate and people can see exactly what it is. So that's very good. Thank you for thinking about that in the first place. Okay, so any other questions for our executive director? If not, we'll go to Theo. Theo, you're up next.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Doe. So for the report today, try to focus on the debrief program that we did in August, and then just provide some updates on a few other items related to legislative work. We held the CMA's 2021 legislative recap on August 12th. So this is our debrief program. The objective was to review key policy efforts and outcomes of the 2021 regular and special sessions. 4 African Heritage legislators served as panelists for the program, and they were Senator Champion, Representative Abagye, Representative Demuth, and Representative Frazier. And we reviewed funding and policy provisions related to various items, the child care and early development, issues related to dignity in pregnancy and childbirth in the Health and Human Services budget, new investments in education, including increased and expedited funding related to COVID and COVID relief assistance for students in schools. We had a discussion about related to the previous thing that we were just talking about, housing stability and rental assistance. A key leader for that in our community has been Representative Agbaje in her work in the Housing Committee and the House's Housing Policy and Finance Committee. She provided a lot of information about what comes after the end of that eviction moratorium, and the fact that we do have some relief assistance out there with rental assistance for renters, and really expanding just renters' rights in this sort of current context we're in. Another issue that we delved into was economic redevelopment, small business assistance, and workforce development in the jobs labor bill. And finally, also investments in community support and human rights accountability in the public safety bill. Just want to thank, again and again, Senator Champion and Representative Agbaje, Demuth and Frazier for their participation in the program. The video and audio for the program, I think, is available online at our website. And definitely there's some good information there for the community. Other updates, just some small items. Actually some really critical items, actually. The community survey project, we've been developing a community research survey to collect data from community about legislative priorities. And this project, the lead for it is our outreach intern, Femi Akindumila. He's been leading us in this work. The objective of the survey is to learn and measure how community members feel about key public policy problems in education, health, economy, public safety, and what they think about proposed policy solutions to those problems. So to really assess how the community is gauging, needs in the community, and in terms of, actual issues and challenges people are facing, and then also the kinds of responses that are needed to actually address those issues. We're very excited about collecting this type of community data and using it to shape our legislative advocacy work in the months and in the year ahead. Another update, we will begin legislative trainings again this month. Our next training will be Wednesday, September 29th at 6 p.m. And we have the information about that, I believe, in the bulletin, and we're distributing information about that in social media. There's an Eventbrite for RSVPing for that event, and we can we'll be having that shared with community. And just a few policy initiatives that we have in our radar and that we'll be discussing and planning around. So just a few updates about those. The African American Family Preservation Act, and just the broader matter of child protection and family development. Legislation that seeks to promote stability and security of African American families, and to do that by redressing extreme racial disparities in the child protection system. So there's some work to be done to really push that legislation, or push initiatives, both in the administrative side and also in the legislative side around that issue, around that problem in the community. Another area is the Crown Act. This is a legislation that seeks to protect against hair discrimination. It ensures that hair texture and hairstyles associated with race are protected from discrimination at work and at school. And it seeks to make that issue, that language explicit in our human rights law. Another area that that we are working in is something called the Gateways for Growth initiative. And this is an initiative to develop policy recommendations for immigrant inclusion in the Twin Cities. This is a national initiative that St. Paul and Minneapolis are a part of, and there's some good work there, and we're serving in the advisory committee of that initiative, that joint initiative. And lastly, very importantly, the Minnesota Main Street COVID relief grants. This was a provision in the jobs labor budget bill that passed this year in special session. This program provides $10,000 to $25,000 grants to Minnesota businesses that can demonstrate financial hardship as a result of COVID-19. The information for applying for this is available in our bulletin, and the applications open September 20th. So please learn more about that grant and that opportunity for businesses in our community. So I will leave it there and open for more questions.
Councilmember Crawford had your hand up. Do you have a question? Otherwise.
First of all, thank you for all the hard work. And real briefly, is there an opportunity to get a copy of that survey? And once you solidify that work in the cities, please push it out to our rural communities, because we do have more and more, well, I am proud to say, immigrant populations moving to our area with not a lot of resources and help. And they need our support. So as that work continues and you're able to push it out farther, please think about some of our communities in the rural areas. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And Theo, before you comment on that, there's a question I have around the survey as well. So first of all, where are you at with the process? Have you determined the questions that are being asked, or what is the process in terms of how effective that's going to be? Whether you did some background study in how to roll it out? Is that something you already reached to that point already, or are you just beginning the process?
Yeah, so I mean, I welcome Linda and also Femi to discuss this, because it's definitely a team project. Definitely, there's been a lot of background work done, to develop the design of the survey, and in terms of content and actual methods, and we're at the point of actually releasing. I believe we are planning to share it with board members, but I'll have Femi and Linda also speak to this. We've been testing. I think we're in the testing phase before we do a full public release.
Definitely, I can. Oh, go ahead, Linda.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Femi. It's your project, and I'm very proud of your work. So let me just say that.
Thank you. So just as Theo was saying, we're in the testing portion. So the structure and the basis of the survey is already rolled out. We're just doing fine tuning here and there to make sure that the validity and the reliability of the survey is still quality. And then we plan to send the final rough draft to the council to see their opinions, whether they wanted to add things, see how they feel the survey, if it fairly represents the council and the mission that CMAH has.
Great, that sounds good. That's exactly what I was alluding to. So, and I trust your work definitely. Once we roll it out, we have full participation to give us some good ideas.
And
okay.
And just so that Councilman Crawford knows, the plan is to roll it out statewide. You know, we'll be strategic with pockets. And we were on a call earlier today about mapping, and so we'll have maps of exactly where our population lives. And so, of course, we'll be targeting that, but you don't have to really be of African heritage to fill this out. We have demographic breakdowns. And so if, you know, others fill it out, that'll just be additional information that we have captured.
Thank you. Thank you both for filling in the blanks for me. I look forward to that, to the survey and being a part of that, the outcomes. Thank you.
And I'll just add that a key part of, you know, when we share it with council members, that the work of that outreach to share it with your broader communities, that would be really crucial, you know, in terms of the reach of this. Yeah, very much.
Right. That's great. Okay, what other questions you have, council members? Okay.
No more for me. Thank you.
All right, good. So then we just defer to Shakira, right? Give us an update on office. Yeah.
Okay, so I just have two super quick small updates for everybody. I did make an update to the council's bulletin. So if you looked at last week's edition, you'll see that I did go in and reformat it to make it a little bit more concise and to make it kind of pop. There are more external buttons, and it's also a little bit more brighter. So last week's edition was our back to school edition for the kiddos that were going back to school that week. We highlighted our legislative training. We also had a big section of grants and loans. We had just a quick piece about 9/11 for its 20th anniversary, information about a rent pop-up, and just a couple articles about things that people may have missed from our last one. It's something to note is that this online request for the ARP funding has been extended through the end of the month, so it will not be ending on September 17th. We got notice that it will be going through the end of the month, so through September 30th. And then just information about our council meetings, as well as a link to view our past council meetings in case anyone wants to find those. I am going through each of the council's past meetings and timestamping each of them on YouTube. So if anybody wants to go back to look at them and find specifically when a certain speaker talked, that will be available for you shortly. I should have that done by the end of the week for all of our council's meetings for the past year and a half that we have been virtual. The next update that I have is just on our oral history project. I did reach out to our facilitator, Jeremiah Ellis. He says that he is on track to have the interviews done, so 12 interviews across the council's 40 years by December. So far, he has managed to interview Steve Belton. He has reached out to Leilani Gibbs as well as Al McFarland to do interviews with them as well as council members. Leilani was from Rochester, and then Al, well, everybody knows Al. So he's just reaching out to them to get some follow-up. He's rescheduled with Claudette Washington from Duluth. So that's who he has going forward to interview with. And again, we do have 12 interviews. He's going to try to do a couple members from each of the council's decades, as well as a few of the legislative members. He did reach out to Representative Pleasant, who was around during, Ray Pleasant, who was around during the initial starting of the councils, but he did not want to speak with him, so he's trying to look out for some other legislative members that may be helpful for him to interview. I did push him in the direction of Representative Moran, as well as Representative Knorr and former Senator Hayden. If there are any other representatives that you know of at the council history that he should reach out to, as well as any additional members that he definitely should look into interviewing, please let me know. Otherwise, that is the office update.
Thank you, Shakira. I just want to mention too that that office bulletin looks awesome, pretty attractive. I know I raised the question because I didn't get the last one, but I went back and checked. It was actually somewhere in my spam. So, council members, this question for all of you: are you getting the bulletin? Are you all receiving the bulletin? I mean, we're not hearing anything, so we'll assume that you are getting it. But definitely try to take a look at it. It's really good. And when you share it too, it's a great thing because it carries a lot of information about what we're doing. So I want to encourage you to pass it on to your contacts when you get the bulletin. It'll help us and try to just get the word out there, what's out there for us. Okay? What questions do you have? Any questions? Anything we didn't cover? Well, it looks like we do have at least 8 minutes. I can actually give those 8 minutes back to you if you don't have questions. All right. Well, at this point, again, we want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for your participation. It was a great meeting, a lot of good information that definitely we can follow up on. Councilmember Winston, did you want to say something?
Oh, no.
Okay. I just saw you appear, so I'm like, all right. Let's see. Yeah, but I just want to thank all of you for your participation and your role. It was a great meeting. We have some follow-ups to do, especially with the proposal by Josh Page and Neel, and also making sure we can get back to Neel around the economic development conversation to have with him. That would be great. So if there are no other questions, I want to wish you all good night, and we'll see you again in our next meeting. The meeting is adjourned. Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you all. Stay well.